All right, welcome to Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football. Andrew Miller here on a Monday night, a little bit later than we would typically go. But, we're back. Talk more about Bulldog football at a time where there's absolutely no focus on Bulldog football. Obviously, all the attention right now on Mississippi State baseball, rightfully so. Hey, 8-0 for the first time since 2015. Let's hope that season does not go like the 2015 season did for the Diamond Dogs. I think they're much better off than that team was. But yeah, teams feel like it's starting to round into form. You'll get another weekend sweep. Obviously, the competition ramps up significantly. Maybe not so much with Austin Peay, which, I guess knock on wood there, that's famous last words. But you look at the 4 games that follow with Arizona State, and obviously, a coach of Willie Bloomquist that Mississippi State absolutely should have hired, right? Arizona State, Virginia Tech, who's off to a solid start to the year, and then the number 1 team in the country, UCLA, who just dominated TCU. And then you go to Hattiesburg for a Southern Miss team that just got it done against Oregon State and handled business in that event they're playing in. So big test, but you feel like the bats are really starting to come to life. The first weekend there was kind of like, hey, the lineup didn't produce the way that State fans were kind of hoping for. They didn't get the big-time production that you were kind of hoping, but it feels like that's really starting to round into form and starting to get the guys step up on the mound. Tomas Valencias has looked really, really good. Ryan McPherson, huge performance for him this past weekend. So, baseball, we'll still know more after this coming weekend, which, of course, how many of us are going to get to watch it because it's, freaking Flow Sports, which is just – I would love to know how that continues to be a thing. Which you could the biggest events in college baseball leading up prior to conference play are on a network that basically no one can access unless you pay a ton of money to do it. That's absolutely absurd, but nonetheless, that's the way they continue to handle things. But hopefully we get enough of an idea of what the Diamond Dogs are going to be after this coming weekend, which, okay, they got to handle business against Austin Peay first. Men's and women's basketball, just a disastrous weekend for them. For the men's team, I mean, you had an opportunity to get some momentum and continue to, like, if you could have talked about the men's team getting into the NIT, like, that would have been, at this point, not acceptable because this team was supposed to go to the tournament, right? But get them into the NIT. I don't really care about the older guys on the team. Just give an opportunity for King Grace, Jamarian Davis-Fleming, Sergey Masura to continue to grow. Those are guys who have all kind of faded the last few weeks. We had talked about them playing pretty well for a while and looking like, okay, that's your future core. They've kind of quieted down a little bit, which, to be fair, I guess some other guys on the team have started to step up a little bit more-ish. But that group has gotten quiet. I would have loved for them to get some postseason experience, though. So some games under their belt in that sort of a setting to kind of build some momentum into next year when those are going to be the guys you're building around alongside Hubbard. But, they go in. South Carolina continues to be like a death trap for State. I don't know what the record is, but State does not play well in Columbia. They don't play well against South Carolina to begin with. I am so happy that series is no longer going to be an annual game for Mississippi State like it had been previously where you were playing them home and home every single year, because it always felt like State split that series year after year. And especially back in the Howland days, like some of those losses cost you potential tournament teams at times when it was like they were never a good team. Frank Martin for a long time was a good coach. His teams would play tough. And I guess that's why they would always get to Mississippi State, but you would lose those games time and time again. It just would come back to haunt you. And then, it's been the same thing now under Jans. It's the South Carolina game. I guess they swept the first season. I think Jans' first year they got the sweep there, but then the last couple of years, maybe they got a sweep last year too. I can't remember as well. I know they got swept Jans' second season. I think like the first game was like the one they were playing without Tolu to open up SEC play, an ugly low-scoring game. And then the second time they played, which that was actually a good South Carolina team. That was Lamont Paris, just one good team that he had. They just got I think it was Colin Murray Boyles just physically dominated Mississippi State in the hump in the final regular season game. State should have been able to win that game to get to 500 SEC play. I mean, it really didn't matter. It wouldn't have affected their seeding when it was all said and done, but they lose that game in overtime. South Carolina's been sort of just a big problem team for State over the years, and I'm glad they're going to be done playing. But, yeah, man, it sucks. You could have built some momentum to close out the year. I imagine they'll probably get one more win. It's a tough stretch the rest of the way. They have Texas, obviously Alabama Wednesday. Then I think it's Texas again, Florida, Arkansas, maybe. I know they got Georgia. I know that. I don't know. It's all teams that are better than them, but I think they'll find a way to get one more win the rest of the way. And then we'll see what they do in the SEC tournament. Not that it's going to matter. They're not built to make a run. I was going to say Nashville. I don't know where the SEC tournament is this year. They've been moving it around, but they're not built to make a run in the SEC tournament to get themselves in any kind of position. So it is what it is. Basketball season has been a disaster for State, but hey, March Madness coming up. I'll still enjoy that, and as well as conference tournaments. And college basketball was a big weekend this past weekend for everybody except Mississippi State. Some awesome games. Women's side, losing by 50 to Vic. That's still kind of like you see that in women's basketball because you have those teams that are so good at the top of the sport, and it's a sign of where State's at and where they've been basically since they lost Vic, to be completely honest. And disappointing for Purcell. I know I talked about this Thursday night, like at the end of the show, kind of check the score, and they take that loss at home to a Florida team that's not good. All they had to do down the stretch, beat Florida. I think they still have Texas A&M, I think is the other team that they still have to play. That's like a lesser team within the conference. But if you get those wins, you're safely in the NCAA tournament. Now you take the loss to Florida. I'm curious where they're at in the net rankings, just to see, because when you get the net plays a bigger role in getting in the field for the women's tournament because they use it basically as the power rating metric. They're still 37th in the net. Honestly, that's not that bad. I don't know. What's women's bracketology? I'm just talking about random thing right now. See, has that been updated at all by good old Charlie Cream? No, he hasn't updated. Going into the weekend, though, so this is before State took the loss. It would have been after the loss to Florida. He still had Mississippi State as in his last 4 buys coming off the loss to Florida, for what it's worth. I'm wondering where he's going to have him now that they've taken the loss to Texas by as much as they did. I don't think he's going to drop him a ton, but they definitely have to win their last regular season game and then probably win 1 or 2 in the SEC tournament, which they're capable of. They're good enough to do that. But that's been the frustrating thing with Purcell's teams is like the highs and lows have been so drastic and they can't seem to get the wins like they absolutely have to secure their spot in the postseason, especially get off that stupid 8-9 line to give themselves a better chance to actually do something in the postseason, which the same thing could be said for Mississippi State under Jans. For the men's basketball side, but alas, Canada sucks. That's nice. I did not watch a second of Olympic hockey until Sunday morning, just because it's one of those things I just was not going to plan my day around and take time to watch those games. But obviously the gold medal game, and I was going to wake up for it. I slept through the first period. And then second period into third period, took a shower and was working on breakfast. So I didn't get to watch a lot of it, but watched the much of the third period and then obviously overtime. And for a guy who didn't watch a second of it, I was freaking patriotic in that moment. I was very proud to see us get the win. Love all the crying from the Canadians about how they're the better team and it was just your goalie. And hey, I don't shy away from the idea that sometimes the best team doesn't always win. Upsets happen in sports. And if you want to say that that goalie performance is otherworldly and that's not something that's replicable moving forward, I don't hate that mindset. At the end of the day, you still took the L. The game played out the way it did, Canada. I'm sorry. I know the discourse on this has taken another direction because of some of the events that transpired since last night. Lord knows I'm not getting into all of that. But happy to see us take gold. And remember, it's our number 4 sport. It's Canada's number 1. So I'm very happy to see that. All right. I've talked now for 10 and a half minutes. Let's talk about why we're actually here, because we're going to talk about some Bulldog football. But for those of you who have tuned in, if you could leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live. And obviously tell all the state fans in your life about what we're doing here at Mississippi State Live. Let's continue to grow this channel and work our way into a big football season. And spring football, I know state fans focus on baseball, and we're going to talk a lot. We're going to talk about baseball as that season goes along, especially once SEC play really gets in. I'm not going to not talk about the team. I think it might be fun, by the way, once we get towards postseason play, maybe some watch-alongs. If that's something any of you would be interested in, and I don't know if that's something we can do on the channel or not. I'll have to talk to some people about it. But I think Mississippi State baseball postseason watch-alongs here on the channel, I think could be a lot of fun. And just reacting live time. Well, again, probably for the postseason. I don't know if we'll do it for regular season, unless there's like LSU series is a big deal. That might be something fun. But I think if y'all want to do baseball watch-alongs on the channel for like some big games or for the postseason, I think let me know. I think it'd be something fun to get into as we move forward. But yeah, I want to continue growing this thing. Obviously, a lot of spring football content is really what we're going to be focusing on primarily, because spring football is going to be getting underway in less than a month. I think the date that got leaked, thanks to whoever was that source for Thunder and Lightning, was like the 17th of March. So we're less than a month away till we start seeing football spring practices and getting some reports out of that. And then obviously gearing up for the spring game. I'm hoping that we get the spring game to be televised once again. I mean, guys can't transfer out. So the whole reason teams were not putting them on TV doesn't apply anymore. I think that'd be a great thing to see once again. Today we're going to talk about the running back position, though, as we continue to kind of break down the positions on this team going into the spring. And it's an interesting spot because I think you've got, obviously, you bring back a returning starter and a guy whose highs last season were really, really high. And I wouldn't say he had low lows. It was just you had some games where you just didn't get much out of him, not necessarily because of him. But Fluff Bothwell coming back as the leader in that room, you've got something to build around there for sure. It's like, okay, if that's your number one back, that seems like that's a guy we've seen be productive in SEC play. We've seen now through 2 seasons of college football, he's a good player. That's a good starting point. And then intriguing pieces around him. With the Xavier Gayten, who last year saw a little bit of an expanded role, but maybe not as much as we were expecting. You have a young guy in Kolin Wilson that we've only seen get a couple of carries now to this point. Specifically last year, I think he only carried the ball 6 times in five appearances. Obviously played in the bowl game, so he was still a redshirt freshman year. So he's going to be a redshirt freshman going in. But, that's someone who was a talented player coming out of high school, felt like a good get for Mississippi State in last year's signing class. So what does that look like for him after a redshirt year on campus? And then you got these 2 freshmen that everybody's really, really excited about in J.J. Hill and Cooper Crosby, with probably one of the more dynamic duos of running backs coming onto campus that Mississippi State's had in quite some time. Obviously, neither of them a 4-star prospect, although we know J.J. Hill should be. It's crazy that he wasn't. But 2 guys who are absolute superstars within the state of Mississippi, who have a complementary styles of play that you can look at and say, man, those 2 look like they could be the dynamic duo in the backfield for Mississippi State for the future moving forward. So it's an interesting group, but even with the returning starter, it's not like you're talking about a room where you're bringing back a ton of rush yards. Last season, Fluff Bothwell ran 142 times for 677 yards, averaged about 4.8 a carry, 6 touchdowns, 61.6 yards per game. You lose Devon Booth out of the room, who obviously was a productive player the last couple of seasons. He was the leading running back in touchdowns last season with 7 at about 553 yards. He had a even bigger year on the ground back in 2024, 759 yards. So that was he was a guy that we had such high expectations for going into this year. Even with Fluff Bothwell coming back, we talked about, I say this year, it's last year. Even with Fluff Bothwell coming in, we had really high expectations for Devon Booth. He had over 1,000 all-purpose yards and double-digit touchdowns scored back in the 2024 season, and it felt like he could take an even bigger step forward this year, and obviously Fluff be the guy as sort of as his running mate back there. But, Booth just didn't quite have the year we were looking for. Was kind of a very up and down year for him. Johnny Daniels had shown a ton of promise in 2024, and you get kind of 2 games out of him before he ultimately decides he's going to redshirt. And a lot of that was the idea that Xavier Gayten had jumped him. But then you look at the year Xavier Gayten had, and it never really fully took off. So would you have been better off with Johnny Daniels still there? I think Daniels ended up at Tulsa. It's either Tulsa or Tulane, one of the TUL schools. I think he's at Tulane. He's at Tulane, I believe. Where look, he's a guy that I think is a power conference caliber running back, or maybe I think there's some power conference schools he could probably start out and play well. He's definitely an FBS running back, right? And he's a guy who could be a very productive player in the right system. And with Will Hall there now as the coach, I mean, they're gonna run the ball a ton. That's for sure. But is Will Hall the head coach there now? Did that actually happen? Yeah, he is. Oh my God, I forgot Tulane. I knew they had made him like a play caller or whatever. It's an interesting decision from Tulane. I'll leave it at that. But he's going to run the football a lot, so I'm sure Johnny Daniels will get a lot of opportunities down there in New Orleans. Regardless, last year, I think this was a group that we were super, super high on going into the season. We probably had the highest expectations of any position group entering the year for running back. And in all, state's running backs averaged about 120 yards a game. Your top 3 guys between Bothwell, Booth, and Gayten. And then, other guys having their individual performances here or there. But those 3 are sort of the guys who you can lean on week in and week out. 120 rushing yards a game, under 5 yards a carry. It wasn't a super productive group, all things considered. Now, certainly not all on them, right? Because you had an offensive line in front of them that just didn't block the way that you would have liked to have seen. It's certainly the case. They did not get the protection up in front of them that you would have needed to be super productive. But it was kind of, frankly, a little bit of a disappointing group for state last season, if we're being honest, compared to where you thought they would be going into the year. So what does this group look like going into the spring? Can they take another step forward? And look, the guy you're going to start with is Fluff Bothwell. As I mentioned last year, lead state in rushing with 677 yards at 4.8 a carry, 6 touchdowns, 61.5 yards per game. Obviously began his career at South Alabama, where had a massive season for the Jaguars as a true freshman, 832 rushing yards at 7.5 yards per carry and 13 touchdowns. Was a truly bruising runner there in the Sun Belt who had a few really, really monster games. Definitely looked like a guy who's ready to step up for the next level. It comes to Mississippi State, and early in the year, you really saw some big-time performances out of him. Kind of quiet start to the season against Southern Miss and Arizona State. But, although 2 touchdowns against Southern Miss, just it was a limited production day from a yardage standpoint. But 93 yards against Alcorn, okay. 101 against Northern Illinois. 134 against Tennessee. That was the best game of the season. 23 carries, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns. Averaged over 5.8 a carry. But Texas A&M kind of gets the limited production. He gets hurt in that game, doesn't play the next 2 weeks, comes back against an Arkansas team that had been terrible at defending the run, 12 carries for 25 yards. And then 9 for 44 against Georgia, 6 for 25 against Missouri, 17 for 80 against Ole Miss, but about 40 of that was on 1 carry. Not that those numbers don't count, but it was kind of one big run and a lot of getting stuffed. And then 14 for 38 yards against Wake Forest. Just didn't have a good day. And obviously, a lot of those teams down the stretch, Wake Forest, Missouri, Georgia, even Ole Miss, frankly, toward late in the year, their defensive fronts were playing well. And were definitely able to outmatch Mississippi State along the lines of scrimmage. That played a role. He's also coming back off of an injury, right? So did he lose a step coming back from the injury? Early in the season, though, you loved what you saw. I felt like he was really good at working that outside zone play, which is not a foundational concept within this offense, but it was something that they ran a lot last year, and he ran it really well. Obviously, a guy that wouldn't go down on first contact frequently, was able to break tackles, which is something that they needed because of some of the struggles they had blocking up front. That Tennessee game, it's not like he was getting great blocking all throughout the game. A lot of those big runs were him going and producing. I thought he kind of impressed a little bit as a receiver. Didn't get super involved in that way, but had a couple nice catches early in the season, and had a big catch against Arkansas. So showed some flashes there. He had a big catch against Southern Miss that got called back for penalty. I remember that as well. So showed some flashes there. That's not a part of his game that you necessarily think of. You think of him as that between the tackles type runner, physical type guy, but you can get him involved in that way as well. What does he look like going into this next season? Is it another step forward for Fluff Bothwell leading that Mississippi State room? And I think they need him to do that because, frankly, behind him kind of got some question marks. And I think you need Fluff to take another step forward. Now, obviously, there's a couple big other factors there. One, you do have him alongside Kamario Taylor. And Kamario being a run threat, in theory, should open things up. Now, that said, we saw him in the game with Kamario Taylor against Arkansas and Georgia, and it didn't really change much. Against Missouri, it didn't really change much. In the Egg Bowl, it didn't change much. Wake Forest did nothing in the bowl game. So does that really open things up? Obviously, the offensive line's a big part of this as well. Do you get the step forward along the offensive line that you need? Like I've talked about, I have mixed feelings on that. I can see it working with the guys that are there, but there's a lot of they have to prove it up front. So you're kind of need for Fluff to be as effective as you need him to in the run game. He's going to have to kind of create on his own at times, which is something that you overlook. This is an era where the running back position has become very undervalued, right? Or it had been for a long time, where it's kind of the idea of, well, every other position on the offense can matter more. And if you got a good offensive line up front, if your passing game is something defenses fear, you're going to get good looks to run the football. And as long as you put a competent athlete in the backfield, they're going to go produce. And that was the case at a lot of schools. And for a lot of, not even schools, case in the NFL. That pendulum is starting to shift a little bit, though, with how teams are defending the run. And it's not about loading up to stop the run. It's about these spacing designed run games, which is what Mississippi State runs, where the run game is really dictated on the spacing on the field and numbers and leverage, RPO, all that kind of stuff. Defenses have found ways to kind of take that away, which means you've got to have guys that can go and create a little bit. And in some ways, it's become similar to if defenses were loading up to stop the run. And it's like, okay, Ashton Jeanty at Boise State was facing a 9-man box every other time he lined up, and it didn't matter because he was Ashton Jeanty. Can you have guys that go and can make it happen and find the crease to get upfield and get positive yardage and continue to churn ahead? Ole Miss is a great example of this. When Quinshon Judkins was at Ole Miss, the offensive lines in front of him were not very good. Those were very average at best offensive lines. But Quinshon Judkins put up massive numbers because he just made it happen in the run game. But didn't always get the big runs. Ole Miss fans always complained about the lack of explosive plays with him and getting caught down. And obviously they started to get fed up with him towards the end of his career because of the money things. But Judkins found ways to churn ahead. When they went to the next year and they had the running back situation that they did, which I know a lot of it in theory could have been solved if they had just played Ulysses Bentley. Why didn't he play? I wonder what that was about. That could have been solved more if you had put him, because he was such a talented player, if you had gotten him on the field. But they tried to just kind of put anybody back there at the running back spot, and it didn't work because that offensive line wasn't good enough. This past year, Ole Miss got better on the offensive line. They were a better group than they were the year before. It was still a pretty average Ole Miss offensive line, all things considered. Kawan Lacey was a stud, and Kawan Lacey continually has shown the ability to make things happen in the run game, even when the looks are not perfect. He can break through contact. He can find a crease. He can move laterally to create space. All those things you need to see out of a back. And the Ole Miss run game took off again. And it was a huge part of what they were able to do offensively throughout the season. And outside of basically against Georgia, they ran the football effectively most of the year. And Miami, for that matter, as well. Georgia and Miami, they really didn't run the ball well. I'm not talking about Mississippi State getting Kawan Lacey production out of Fluff Bothwell. But they need Fluff, I think, to unless the offensive line gets much better, and that group gels as well as they possibly could, they're going to need Fluff Bothwell to be a really productive player for them. There's no doubt about that, and to be able to create some on his own. I also think Levy's going to probably have to scheme some things up a little bit more, and how they design sort of their run game. Are they going to have to lean more on some misdirection stuff and some motion to create rushing lanes, which is not something they do a ton of. But will he bring some of that back? That's kind of the question. I think Fluff could be in for a big year. I mean, assuming he's fully healthy and that relationship with Camario and how the run game grows, that's going to be a big thing to watch. But look, a lot of it dictates on the blocking in front of him. But it also, is going to dictate on, can he take a step forward and get back to the form he showed early last season? He's still a really solid number one. What do you have alongside him? And the first guy you talk about is Xavier Gayten, who's an interesting player because I think there was a ton of quiet hype around Gayten going into last year that never fully materialized. Gayten, as a true freshman in 2024, getting some playing time, showed some flashes, right? Didn't get a ton of opportunities, but against Arkansas, he got a couple of carries and looked really, really good. And then the next week against UMass comes back and has a long touchdown run, and you see some of that explosive play capability. Arkansas also had a nice reception. And you saw these plays, and you're like, that guy can do something. What's he going to be the next year? And then, you go into his sophomore season, and there's all this talk about, hey, man, he's taking a nice step forward. It kind of felt like he had jumped Johnny Daniels. As we talked about earlier, Johnny Daniels chose to take a red shirt because of Xavier Gayten. Well, doesn't touch the ball the first 2 weeks of the season. Alcorn State, 4 carries, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Fantastic. 4 carries for 45 and a touchdown against Northern Illinois. Okay, this guy's he looks like the player we were expecting coming into the year. Now, lesser competition, but getting those opportunities. But then again, it goes another couple games without touching the football. I'm trying to see, did he have a catch? He did have a catch against Southern Miss. I forgot about that. But Tennessee and Texas A&M doesn't get a carry. Florida, he gets involved in the action because Fluff Bothwell was down. 6 carries for 27 yards. 4.5 a carry. Had a fumble. A rough fumble down in the red zone. On a play where he probably cut a run outside they didn't have to. Bounced a run outside. He also, in that game earlier, there's a play where he takes a handoff and he has a creased man that if he sees it, it's a touchdown. And instead, he tries to squeeze into a gap that's just not there. There was talk about, what can he do from a protection standpoint? It's kind of being an issue for him. So you kind of see some vision things, some protection things. He had the fumble, and I think he might have had another fumble in another game. I can't remember for sure. Just didn't materialize the way you would have liked to have seen. And, against Texas, 3 carries for 3 yards. 5 for 16 against Missouri. 2 for 8 against Ole Miss. And then Wake Forest as the number 2 behind Fluff. 5 carries for 8 yards. And again, I understand State's offensive line being a problem. But you do need a little bit more out of that running back room. Those guys have to step up and produce. What Xavier Gayten is State going to be able to get? Is this a guy that against really, really bad defenses, you can get a couple touches, he's going to make a big play, and that's kind of it? Or does he finally take a step forward into a well-rounded player? State needs that. They need him to show some of that, I think. And what's great, he's a good contrast to what you get with Fluff, where Fluff is sort of that downhill between the tackles power back. Gayten is the guy who you think has the breakaway speed to be the explosive play threat out of the backfield. Now, I think some of it is I would like to see Levy utilize him in some different ways. I think getting him out on the edge would be a good thing. Getting him, using him in jet motion would be a good thing. Throwing him screens, I think, would be a good thing. It's a swing passes. Now, I talked about it a million times on the show. The screens and swing passes didn't work for this team last year because they couldn't block it out on the perimeter. That's got to get better. And to be fair, maybe that's a part of Gayden's game that's not great for him. Receiving wise, last year 3 catches for 2 yards. He had 1 catch for 5 against Texas, 1 for -4 against Southern Miss, and then 1 for 1 against Missouri. So maybe it's a deal of they don't see him as a great receiver out of the backfield, and then you can't really get him involved in that way. But I do think he's a guy that you can get him to the edge, get him in space, that's the best way to utilize him. And frankly, by having Kamario Taylor, that opens up that possibility a little bit because Kamario is a guy that could be that between the tackles runner in the run game. Levy tried to run Blake a lot last year at times and would run Blake between the tackles on quarterback zone, quarterback power, stuff like that. But in theory, that's not Blake was best suited as a runner, getting the occasional option keeper around the edge where he could just be in open space and where he could accelerate pretty decently quickly and go pick up 10, 15 yards while nobody's expecting to get the ball. If you do that, your running back kind of is your guy who's your inside threat, which clearly for Gayten kind of seems to be where he's got to get better. Kamario is the guy that you can put between the tackles. And with Kamario being a runner between the tackles, that sort of opens up, okay, this is our guy who's physical downhill when he's in the game. We get the ball to Gayten as a threat to the edge. And in a way, it opens things up. It gives you some versatility there. And the great thing with Kamario's versatility in the run game is the opposite could be true with Fluff. Kamario is a good enough athlete. If you want him to be the guy on the edge and Fluff be the guy between the tackles, you can do that as well. So no matter how you game this up, you can attack all parts of the field in the run game between Gayten and Fluff on the field. You've got to see both those guys step forward, but especially Gayten. I think Fluff, I'm pretty confident Fluff will have a fine season. Can he get up to 800-plus yards or challenge for 1,000 yards? I mean, it's going to be tough because of the offense and because of Kamario getting a lot of the carries, but it's a possibility. We'll see. Gayten is the one you're sort of watching to see, can he take that next step? Now, if he doesn't, there's some guys waiting in the wings who could challenge him, and that's kind of the part that is interesting to watch for sure. We'll start with a guy that kind of totally gotten overlooked in this, and that's Kolin Wilson, who, last year was a redshirt freshman for State, only saw action in 5 games, including the bowl game, and look, didn't get a ton of action, right? 1 carry for 3 yards against Southern Miss, 4 for 23 against Alcorn, had 1 carry in the Missouri game. Did he have a reception against? Yeah, he had 1 catch for 8 yards against Wake Forest, didn't carry the football. Didn't get a ton of action. A guy that, 5'9", 190 out of Gulf Shores, kind of a small, explosive type player. Not quite as big as Gayten, but sort of fits the mold as that speed and space type player. Can he be that complement? Does he take another step forward after a year of redshirting? We haven't seen anything to say one way or another, frankly, because he just hasn't gotten the touches. But that's a guy who's incredibly productive coming out of Gulf Shores High School. And look, he's going to have a leg up on the freshman that we'll talk about here just in a sec, just from an experience standpoint, having been in the system. This will be in his second year going into it and knowing the playbook and knowing how they handle things. Obviously, part of the question there, and one of the questions for Gayten is, okay, well, where is he going to be at from a pass protection standpoint? Where is he going to be at in terms of being able to read things out? You don't really know that yet. But he's a guy that's got some explosive capability. He's definitely a player I think in the spring is going to be interesting to watch. His running back position in the spring as a whole going to be very interesting to watch who emerges out of that group. I don't have a lot of words to say on Kolin Wilson because we haven't seen a lot of him. But it was a talented pickup for State when they got him. Explosive player. You think they could find a way to make him work. The freshman is where everybody is going to be looking with the 2 freshmen you have coming in J.J. Hill and Cooper Crosby. And if we're talking about, I think we went into the year talking about Booth and Bothwell as this dynamic duo. Hail State from Bulldog, Mississippi. Hail State to you. We were talking about Booth and Bothwell being this dynamic duo, and I guess it never fully materialized the way that you wanted to, but the idea was those guys can complement each other stylistically, with Booth being sort of the explosive guy, get him out to the edge, get him involved in the receiving game. He's going to take a carry to make one guy miss, and he's gone for 50 yards, whereas Bothwell, bruiser, downhill between the tackles, short yardage type back, who's going to get the tough yards for you, sort of keep the chains rolling. In a way, you look at J.J. Hill and Cooper Crosby, and that's kind of the future vision that you have, is that these 2 guys complement each other within this system, because J.J. Hill is that tough physical runner. He listed on State's roster, 6 foot 220, kind of a bowling ball back there. Not a guy who's got big time speed, although he moves more than well enough. It's not like he's not quick, but doesn't have the immediate acceleration that maybe you would look for, which is probably why he was docked. But man, the guy is one tough runner. The guy was incredibly productive at a very good program at Tupelo throughout his career. That's a guy who kind of can sort of, you see him being that next Fluff Bothwell, right? And playing a similar role like that. And I think he would have an opportunity to compete right away. Cooper Crosby compliments. Cooper Crosby's kind of, okay, well, that's your next Devon Booth. He is the immediate speed. I think he was clocked at like an official 4.39. So, a 4.4 runner or sub 4.4 runner in the 40-yard dash. And when you go watch him at Gulfport, I mean, every time he touches the ball, it's just, he gets uphill quick, man. But he's obviously got that shiftiness in space as well. He's a guy that you can get involved in the screen pass game a little bit more. And if you want that to be an element of your offense, I think both those guys are going to have an opportunity in year one. Because I think right now, there's only one guy you circle in at running back and could say confidently he's going to play a big role, and that's Fluff, right? You have your returning starter. You know he's a good player. Yeah, you need to see him take another step forward. You need to see him grow a little bit more. But Fluff Bothwell is a really good player from Mississippi State. He's the guy there. What do you have beyond that? Xavier Gayten had a big opportunity last year, didn't really capitalize on it. Now you're going into year 3. Kind of feels like a make-or-break year for Gayten. Like either he has a big year this year or that's kind of it for him. Kolin Wilson, going to have an opportunity. We just haven't seen it. So can he be one of the stars of spring? And then both these freshmen coming in, I would imagine they'd want a red shirt, at least one of them. I mean, look, I think perfect world for Mississippi State is that Gayten and Wilson both have really good springs, and then you feel confident going to the fall. We can redshirt Crosby and Hill. Because for as much as fans are excited to see them, and look, you're going to get the opportunity to see them. They're going to play in some games for sure, assuming they're healthy, because you got the redshirt rule. As much as fans are excited to see them, your perfect world is that the 3 guys ahead of them are all just really good backs, and you can redshirt those guys, save a year. But it's going to be hard to keep them off the field if the other guys in front of them aren't really fully producing, because both of them are talented enough to play right away. Obviously, there's a lot of learning that comes with that. I kind of talked about Wilson. What are you able to do from a protection standpoint? And, Kolin Wilson, especially on the smaller side, that kind of plays a role. JJ is more than big enough. And Crosby's 6'2", 205. So, I mean, it's not like he's a small back. I think both those guys are big enough that you can trust them from a protection standpoint. Guys have to learn that. And how do they learn, reading things out within this offense and what they're asked to do? All of that is something that you just don't know how quickly they're going to come along. But they're going to have an opportunity because I think it's wide open behind Fluff Bothwell, if you ask me. Quarterback and running back are stacked. Rooms are stacked. I think you've got solid depth at QB. We talked about that in the last episode there, which, as you said, nothing wrong with depth. I like the depth and options you have at quarterback, and obviously with Camario, you've got a guy with a really high ceiling. You don't have a proven commodity high-level player. I think we all believe Camario is going to get there. He still has to show it. So you don't have a guy that, like, I know that's a guy who put up big numbers at the quarterback position in college football as a starter at the high level. You don't have that yet. But you've got some good depth options, and you have a really high-ceiling starter. Running back, I think you've got a good starter in Bothwell. You've got some nice potential behind him. Who's going to emerge? That's kind of the question you're looking at there. But, yeah, it's a group that to me is going to be fascinating in the spring for sure, because whereas last year we felt so confident about your top 2 guys, and then, hey, man, Johnny Daniels really good as well. Xavier Gayten, we love the flashes that he showed. You're still – you didn't fully get what you wanted to, but now this year you go in, it's like, okay, we think we know what we have in Fluff. It's just going to get back to what he showed early in the season. After him, like I said, Gayten didn't take the step forward. The other guys we really haven't seen. So it's a position group that's you're wanting to see a lot of out of the spring for sure. Now, as I talked about early on, offensive line play is going to dictate a lot of that, right? Are they going to get the protection in front of them that they have to have if they're going to have a big season? We'll see on that. But look, it's a group that's got some good potential. It's a group that could definitely perform well, but definitely going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in the spring. Swan and Rashada bring the experience. Yeah, no, they're your experienced options in there, which is why I like the pickups in the contrast of what they can be. Whereas I think you look at Swan as kind of your, all right, you know what this guy is in college football. He can be a solid starter. If you had to turn over to a veteran, that's probably who you're going to. Rashada, it's kind of one of those like, hey, man, there's still some athleticism, still some raw talent. If it clicks for him for once and you had to go to somebody else, can he finally be that player? I believe Johnny Daniels transferred to Tulane. I'm going to double check that. Yeah. Johnny Daniels at Tulane, playing for Will Hall. So he's going to run the football, I would imagine, a lot. I don't know. What is – do they have their top running back? What? I'm curious. Now we'll look at this real quick. Because I know they had a guy last year who was pretty productive, but I'm trying to remember if he's coming back or not, or if we got hit the portal, because that's always a thing you have to look to. Okay, running back. I don't think any of these guys were the dudes for them last year. Jalen Lucas. Oh, the Florida State transfer. Oh, interesting player. Carried Tulane running back last season. That guy might have gone to the NFL that I'm thinking of. No, their top back is returning, Jamari McClure. Yeah, so their top running back is back. So Daniels is not going to be the top guy in the room. But I mean, he'll factor in plenty down there, I'm sure. Like Will Hall, I mean, they're going to run the football. That's kind of all his offenses can do. I talked about it earlier. When I realized, we're talking Tulane, Johnny Daniels, like playing for Will Hall. It's an incredible move by Tulane. I just cannot believe that's the direction they went. Maybe he succeeds more. It is kind of telling. State didn't really lose guys to the portal outside of offensive line to go land at other power conference programs. Only a few. I don't remember the full rundown. I had it written down somewhere, but most of the guys who left ended up at G5s, which is a pretty good sign, all things considered. A couple defensive linemen did end up at power conference teams. But, I mean, that's kind of your roster retention thing. I mean, look, I think Daniel's a good player. Frankly, I think he could have helped you last year when all things are considered, but not like a massive, massive loss. I think they're going to be okay at running back. I do, but that's definitely a group. It's all throughout the offseason, kind of who steps up, sort of the big question there. Levy actually did a good job with retention. Yeah, no, that is for all the criticisms you could have about the class. The one thing you can't criticize is roster retention. Maybe you could argue how they handled some of the offensive line things, considering the group that came in, where you didn't hit on a true proven, like this guy's been a multi-year starter, high level at other programs. You didn't hit on that. At O-line, you've got some guys where it's like, okay, these guys need to step forward. You see what's possible, but they got to take a step forward, which kind of leads into like, okay, would you have liked to have had a Luke Work or a Javen James back? Opinions on them notwithstanding, could it have been more beneficial for you to have held on to at least one of those guys? Probably. But overall, the guys that you felt we got to bring him back, we really want him back, they kept all of those, which has put them in a decent spot. I kind of keep teasing this. I have a theory on the roster that I would like to get through the spring first and kind of see a few things before I really break it down. I know I talked about recently kind of have they gotten the roster back to an SEC level, and I think it's close for sure. But I'm wondering if the stars are aligning for them to have a roster that could actually be competitive. When I say competitive, I don't mean competing for the SEC or for a playoff berth. I mean good enough to actually have a good team next year, not just like, all right, they can find a way to get to a bowl game. I need to see a couple spots figured out, but there's a world where I think they're hitting on enough key spots and kind of have the experience where they need it, that it could be a really good group. That's something, again, once we get out of the spring and we kind of have a better idea of what we're looking at, I definitely would like to explore a little bit. Hard to keep linemen in general in the portal era. Yeah, it is. I've talked about it a lot. The offensive line position is one where so much of it comes down to development, and it's hard to do now because guys want to go play. And you're in an era of college football where if as a redshirt freshman, players do not believe they are in position to be the starter, they hit the portal. It's like, okay, for freshman year, I'm willing to, if I have to sit that year, that is what it is. But as a redshirt freshman, I better be in position to at least compete for the starting job or get a ton of playing time. And if I'm not in position to do that, I need to go elsewhere because my clock is ticking to get to the NFL. My clock is ticking to start earning starting money. The problem is offensive line is not a spot where that happens because those guys, one, they need at least 1 year to get the bodies right. Then you need another year or two really to figure out how you fit within your system, how you understand, okay, these are the fronts that we see. These are the pressure looks we're going to see. And how do we block that up? How do we handle that? What are our calls within our system for how we handle double teams, how we pass things off? The guys I'm going to be playing alongside, how does his technique impact what I do? Like that is a group where everybody's got to come together, which takes a ton of reps, a ton of playing time, a ton of experience. The best offensive lines are consistent of programs. I know this is obvious, but it's like you have guys who are redshirt juniors and older, or at least third-year players, like for the more talented ones. That's not to say you can't come in and with like young freshmen and they play really well, like they can. But for much of college football, it's about getting old and staying old, and that is so hard to do in the portal, which we talked about this when it came to the portal class. I think State is very clearly attempting that when you look at the guys that came in, like a Mario Nash, like a Tyler Miller, LJ Perdome, Jalen Matthews. Those guys, in theory, are Isaiah Autry-Dent. Those guys are your bones for being a strong offensive line in the next year or two. It's just how does that impact this year? We'll see. But yeah, it's tough in the portal with that group for sure. And it's tough to go out and get the players. Again, I know I'm just rehashing things I talked a ton about throughout the offseason already, but high caliber linemen are tough to get in the portal because there's so few of them and everybody wants them. The bones are good. I think so anyways. Yeah. He's talking about the roster there and just some of the key pieces. You can look position by position and see somebody that's like, okay, that could work out really well for them. And I think they fill a lot of necessary needs, but it's the lines of scrimmage really is what you got to figure out. And are you putting Camario in the right environment for success? Those are going to be the big things to watch. But hey, about a month from now, we'll start getting some answers on that. Looking forward to it. So yeah, that'll wrap up today's episode. Again, taking a look at the running back room that I think solid starter at the least, if not a good starter. What do you have behind Fluff Bothwell? That's going to be sort of your question moving forward. But a ton of competition in the spring that I think is going to be really exciting to watch. Appreciate those of you who tuned in, and shout out to Bulldog Mississippi in the chat. Love the back and forth. If you haven't already, leave us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are not already. And as always, swing your sword. Hail State.